And I call the member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I join the member for Corio in his support of the Telecommunications Amendment Integrated Public Number Database Bill 2009 and acknowledge the Coalition wishes to cooperate with the Government to secure the passage of this legislation as soon as possible. Deputy Speaker, we've all been struck by the images of disaster and the impact of the bushfires across Victoria. We've had some impassioned speeches from members of all sides as they've reflected on the significance of this event, where more than 2,000 homes have been lost and more than 200 people have perished. And many people in the aftermath of this epic tragedy have spoken about the speed of the fires and the magnitude of these fires and the lack of warning they had of the fire front approaching them. And I think it's important that we as members of Parliament do whatever we can to facilitate this bill as soon as possible. I don't see it as a silver bullet or a solution to all the problems we're facing in relation to the future management and prevention of bushfires, but it is just another tool we'll be able to use to hopefully reduce the impact of these bushfires in the future, particularly the impact on human lives. The bill does not particularly canvass the proposal of the early warning system, but it's freely acknowledged it is seen as an important first step in ensuring that state and territory emergency service providers have access to the information that they require to develop the telephone-based warning system. The bill amends the Telecommunications Act of 1997 to allow access by an emergency management person, as authorised by the Attorney-General, to information contained in the integrated public number database. It's believed that this will help to facilitate in emergency situations with the communications of warning, for instance, in situations of bushfires which we've just experienced. Now, prior to the 2007 federal election, I understand the Coalition put the issue of an early warning system on the COAG agenda, and emergency agencies have argued for a national system, although differences between the states and territories over a period of time have delayed the establishment of such a system. And I think it's a sign of the goodwill of political leaders on all sides that they've put aside any partisanship in relation to this issue and are moving forward in a manner which I believe is both constructive and will have some practical outcomes for the communities have been affected not only by this bushfires, but the reality that there will be bushfires in the future which will threaten our homes and our lives. There are a number of technical issues that remain outstanding with the database, and I won't go into the details now. I think the member of Corio has covered them well. But the circumstances under which the IPND can be accessed for a warning will be determined, as I said, by the Attorney-General, and it's anticipated that an emergency will be defined under existing state and territory legislation. The bill does also provide measures to protect the personal information contained in the database, including that subscriber names may not be disclosed by the authorised user or by secondary disclosure. And these are important considerations of a system of this magnitude. And I endorse the position put by the bill that criminal penalties up to 2 years imprisonment will apply for misuse of the data, consistent with the existing provisions of the Telecommunications Act. Regardless of the passage of the bill, we do note that the regulations will permit the state and territory access to the necessary information immediately, and that's as it should be. But in relation, Deputy Speaker, to the broader significance of this bill as a precursor to an early warning system, I'd like to make a few comments and really feed back to the House some of the information I've received from the fire front and from people at community meetings. And typical of that feedback is an email that I received from a family in Druin West in the neighbouring Cedar McMillan. The family has written to me, and I'll just read a quote from the email without divulging the family's name. "I find the need to write to you expressing concern over the lack of warnings available to residents, especially rural residents. Normally I'm at home with my 4 children and my husband is at work. When I'm at home, I do not normally have the radio on as I'm busy with the children. For the same reason, the television is not on. Except for the fact that a neighbour who normally has no contact with us bothered to pick up a phone because they had a member of the family in the CFA and had early warning, there is no way I would have known of the danger until it was too late. I'm sure you can understand that with 4 children and 2 with a disability, I do not have the luxury of looking out the window to see if there is a fire coming, and on this particular day, the smoke was going up before being taken away, so even that was not a clue at the time I needed to evacuate. Smoke was of course an issue as the fire became closer, but by then it would have been too late to leave." And the email goes on, "There needs to be a faster and more efficient communication system, one that covers the deaf and blind, the elderly, the disabled, the stay-at-home parents, the farmers out in the paddock, everyone. Please let this be dealt with urgently." So, Deputy Speaker, that is very much a feedback from the fire ground, if you like, of a mother, probably very typical of a situation of a rural community. She was flat out on that day, on February the 7th, had no chance to really be monitoring the situation and probably had no real inclination of the impending danger in the Drew and West area. And I've had that similar comments from people in the Gippsland community as well, that they simply did not feel the imminent danger of the fire front, and it wasn't until the wind changed that they realised that they may have been in a spot of bother, and by then for some it was too late. And many did flee and successfully got away from the fire front, but the commentary from this mother really reflects the situation we're faced with, where there is an expectation in the community that there will be action on these issues. We need to be mindful, Deputy Speaker, with that expectation that there is an element of residents becoming more aware, an education focus perhaps, becoming more aware of the circumstances they are living in. We've seen a rapid increase in the number of people relocating to the tree change areas and the sea change areas of my electorate in particular, and we welcome them with open arms. But we need to make sure, if they've come from a suburban environment, they are well aware of the challenges and the potential threats of bushfires during the summer season. It's something that we need to be mindful of in the future. I've spoken briefly about the technical aspects of this bill, but it's the practical applications of any early warning system that I think will need very careful consideration by all concerned in the implementation phase. It must not be seen as the single solution to the problem. At best, it is going to be a minor part of a much bigger problem. There are three elements, Deputy Speaker, which contribute to these major fire events. And we need a point of ignition, we need hot windy days, and we need fuel. Now, quite simply, we're always going to have points of ignition, whether it be idiots who light fires, whether it be accidental activity on a farm-based situation, or whether it be a lightning strike. Similarly, we're always going to have hot and windy days where the fire risk is off the scale. We can't do anything about those two circumstances. They are part of the great country we live in. But the one area we can have an impact on is the fuel. We can have a direct impact on the level of fuel and the degree of the intensity of the fires when they do occur. It's one of those issues, Deputy Speaker, which I fear we've talked a lot about for many, many years, decades in fact, and failed to really grapple with it properly. The common sense, the practical feedback from people on the ground is that we must do more fuel reduction burning. I've heard many impassioned speeches from members of Parliament, but also from residents and from emergency services agencies saying there needs to be a greater prescribed burning regime, and I refer specifically to the Victorian situation. The high fuel fires on extreme weather days are simply impossible for us to defend. We must do more in reducing the intensity of these fires and buying more time for people. By the time that we're implementing an early warning system, Deputy Speaker, I fear that really the horse has already bolted. Once the fire has started, we're really playing catch-up from then on. The opportunity for us is at the beginning of the process to reduce the amount of fuel in the environment. From a Victorian perspective, the Chief Fire Officer, Ewan Waller, is someone who I regard as a personal friend, but also I hold in the very highest esteem professionally for his career and his contribution he's made to the Victorian Public Service. And I share. I feel a great deal of empathy for Ewan in his position as the Chief Fire Officer responsible for the prescribed burning regime, in that I don't think we're providing him with the resources required to carry out the job that's expected of him. Over the past decade in Victoria, we have seen a pitiful attempt to reduce the fuel load. We have only burnt in the magnitude of 30 to 40,000 hectares per year, and I must acknowledge, however, there has been an increase in the past 12 months, something in excess of 100,000 hectares, which is getting more along the lines of what the community expectation is of this agency in terms of its fuel reduction effort. I believe we must be providing more resources to the agency and to Mr Waller in the work he does to ensure that he can burn on a larger number of days. I completely reject the principle being put, or the argument being put, that there are so few days we can burn safely in Victoria. I believe that there are far more days we can burn if we put resources on the ground to assist in that process. We're going to need to accept that there's an element of risk. If you're burning more frequently, if you're pushing the envelope, so to speak, Deputy Speaker, there will be occasions where there'll be escapes, and we need to be tolerant of that, and we need to raise the community's understanding that it is for the good of the community that we have these prescribed fuel these prescribed burns to reduce the level of fuel in the environment, and it's in their own interest for the protection of their properties and their families in the future. That is the feedback I'm receiving from residents on the ground. It has been a constant message for many years, and I believe there are opportunities for us to provide more resources to the agencies, but also to engage more with our local CFA brigades in the off-season. I fear that we rely on these men and women of the Country Fire Authority in a crisis situation, but we're not really assisting them or engaging with them during the off-season, when I believe they are equally as important. And there may be opportunities, and I know it's maybe anathema to a lot of people, there may be opportunities to provide some training wage, some sort of subsidy to the CFA directly to the volunteers involved if they're doing this prescribed burning work. There is an expectation or a strong sense of duty within our CFA volunteers that it is purely a voluntary service. But we have a small army of people in Victoria, about 58,000, I think, CFA volunteers who have the skills, who have been trained up, they have the practical knowledge, they've fought on many fire fronts. They also have skills that we could be using during the fire off-season, if you like, on the preventative measures, and there may be opportunities for employment associated with that. It would not tarnish their reputation at all as the heroes of our bushfires in terms of their voluntary commitment. But I think if we're going to expect these agencies to make commitments to these long campaign fires, it is unrealistic to expect the business community to be relieving their volunteers for all of this work, and to be expecting our volunteers to carry the high cost, at significant personal cost and economic cost. I think there are opportunities to resource our prescribed burning campaign in conjunction with the trained staff we have within the CFA. In any case, Deputy Speaker, we have a significant problem with the ageing nature of our CFA volunteer workforce, and we need to do more to be encouraging younger people to be involved in the future. I'm sure the Royal Commission of Victoria will consider these and many other issues, and including the merits of the early warning system, which is the substance, I believe, of the bill which is before us today. And just as I referred to the many practical issues involved with prevention of bushfires, I believe there's going to be a lot of practical issues that need to be considered as part of our discussion of the early warning system. And I do support in principle, as I referred to earlier, to the correspondent from the Cedar Macmillan. I do support in principle that there is a better information flow to people in this emergency situation. That is a real key concern for people. They need to know what's going on, and it becomes very difficult for people once the emergency starts. From the Gippsland experience, one of the critical aspects of the last bushfires was we lost access to our regional ABC radio. Now, not across the whole electorate, mind you, but in certain patches of the electorate, the transmission went down when the towers at Mount Tassie were exposed to the fire front. And as our emergency services broadcaster, we had become accustomed to listening to the ABC as a first point of interest, as a first point of information. When that transmission tower came under attack, a lot of people were left without direct information on the fire front. So the telephone-based early warning system would complement, I would think, something the ABC emergency services broadcaster process, but it'd also be exposed to similar threats in relation to making sure the message gets out to the people who need it the most. Unfortunately, a lot of our areas in rural and regional areas are in quite rugged terrain, and the mobile phone coverage, for example, Deputy Speaker, can be patchy at best. So there's going to be issues there in making sure that the people who need the message the most actually receive the message, and there are going to be practical measures that I'm sure in the implementation phase will need to be fully discussed. The timing of the warning is something that I think will need a great deal of reflection by those who are charged with the management of any system which is introduced. We're going to need a situation where someone who is close to the fire front will need to be informing the Incident Control Centre, which can be difficult, and there'll be issues about who makes the decision about when to send out a warning, when is it too late to be advising people to leave, and they'll all be significant points of discussion as we move forward with this entire issue. We need to be avoiding, of course, that situation of the last-minute rush which proved so fatal in so many of our communities. But there is going to be, I believe, a very heavy burden of responsibility to fall on someone's shoulders in relation to these practical issues of who makes those calls in relation to the time to leave and giving information to people about the best course of action. So I do support the early warning system in principle, but I think that the protocols for the use of any type of system will need to be established very early, and we don't want to be overplaying this as a solution to the bushfire crisis. Just as people don't expect to have a fire tanker at their door, they mustn't expect a text message giving them precise information of the time to leave and the road to take to safely escape. We can't be creating a situation where people become dependent on information which may not even come in some circumstances, be circumstances beyond the control of the emergency incident control centres. I do believe that an early management system does have the potential to save some lives, and saves any lives. It's well worth doing, Deputy Speaker, but it should be part of a suite of much bigger reforms. And as I referred to earlier, once the fire has started, we're actually playing catch-up from that point onwards. The information and the warnings that are delivered during an event are always going to be important, but they must never replace the practical, the common sense steps we all need to be taking in terms of preparing our properties, reducing the fuel loads and keeping our roads clear in the event of fires. As I flagged in the condolence motion a week or so ago, the issue of leaving early or defending a well-prepared home is going to be one of the pivotal questions as we go forward in our hopes to minimise the impact of bushfires and prevent the loss of life. I think the experience of the past couple of weeks in Victoria has given our community a very harsh dose of reality in terms of our capacity to deal with these fires in situations where we've had such a long build-up of dry weather and fuel in the forest floor. And I think we've run the risk of underestimating the potential of these fires and perhaps overestimating our own capacity to deal with them on days when the fire scale is completely out of all proportion to what we normally expect. It has given us all, I think, a very good sense of perspective on what's important in our lives, and I think we've seen already in the current fires which are occurring in Victoria as we speak today, there has been seems to be more of a readiness for people to leave early, to pack up those few possessions they want, and to acknowledge that their lives are more important than staying to defend a property. I think we're going to see more of that in the future. We're going to need to be able to accommodate those people if they do make that decision to leave early. There will be people leaving en masse from some of the suburban hinterland areas. There's a real balancing act to be managed here, Deputy Speaker, in that in certain circumstances I'm very confident of people's capacity to defend their properties if they stay and defend. But on days like we had on February the 7th, I doubt that anyone could manage to defend a property if they face the full front of the fire. Finally, I've spoken in the past, Deputy Speaker, about the need for a national database of every known firebug with strict reporting provisions which require these people to report any change of address and subject them to higher levels of scrutiny and police surveillance if required. It's an issue that I feel very strongly about, Deputy Speaker, and it would allow authorities to keep a check on these people during the days of extreme danger when firebugs tend to be at their worst, and the most serious offenders could even be required to report to authorities on days of total fire ban. It's very hard for our fire authorities to manage the lightning strikes and the accidental ignition of fires, let alone the constant threat of criminal activity contributing during the fire danger period. I've written to the Prime Minister and sought his support for this practical measure that I believe could help to reduce the incidence of deliberately lit fires in the future. Again, it's not a silver bullet. It's just another tool that we can keep to help our emergency services personnel, and particularly to help our police in detecting these offenders, but keeping an eye on them on days when I fear they are at their worst. And I say a prayer, if you like, Deputy Speaker, for the emergency services personnel in Victoria faced with the conditions which are expected tomorrow, that they will require all the good fortune that we can wish upon them, and we'd rather see an inch of rain than the conditions which are heading their way tomorrow. Deputy Speaker, as I said from the outset, the Coalition does wish to cooperate with the government in relation to this bill. The telephone-based early warning system, I believe, has potential to assist our communities to remain safe in these emergency situations, and allowing access by an emergency management person to information contained in the integrated public number database is a positive move, but it shouldn't distract us from the hard work, the practical work that's required to prevent these bushfires and minimise their impact in the future.